This podcast is produced by The Brand is Female.
Always was, always will be. Ancestral land. Always was, always will be.
Tanse, hello, and welcome back to the Matriarch Movement podcast. I'm your host, Shayla Oulette Stonechild, and I'm very excited and inspired by this conversation with Leigh Joseph. Not to mention, I was saying her name Leia during this whole podcast interview, and it's Leigh Joseph. She is from the Squamish First Nation. She is an ethnobotanist, a researcher, and a community activist, and her goal is to contribute to cultural knowledge renewal and connection to Indigenous plant foods and medicines. She does this through her skincare line called Sḵwálwen. I invite you to check out her Instagram. Also, if you can support her business through her online store. We talk about plant medicine, connecting back to the land, and why it is so important. Without further ado, Leigh Joseph. Thank you so much for joining and for taking the time out of your afternoon. If you just want to introduce yourself how you normally would in your language. Hi.
Sďawat Leigh Joseph Queensna Tnachantla Squamish Ocomeo on Wanoxton Sḵwálwen Botanicals. Hello, my name is Leigh Joseph and my ancestral name is Styawat and I come from the Squamish First Nation. I'm happy to be here today. My heart is full.
Yeah, so let's check in. How are you doing? I feel like it's now June. There's a lot of stuff going on in the collective. I watch your Instagram. It seems like you're always busy, collaborations, putting out new products. How are things going for you right now?
Yeah, it feels like there's a lot going on, probably because there is. Yeah, I think it's interesting because this is the time of year where so my work is really grounded in connecting to the land through culturally important plants. And so my background in training, like in a Western, I guess, lens is as an ethnobotanist, which is someone who studies the cultural interrelationships between people and plants. And then from a cultural and personal standpoint, I've been on this path of learning and reconnecting to plants through, my cultural lens. And so this time of year, it's like this pull to be out on the land and to be really connected with the seasons and what, different plant medicines and foods are coming into season. And then also because my business, Sḵwálwen Botanicals, is really, there's a lot. It's really dynamic. There's a lot happening there, which is exciting. But I'm really, working to find that balance of connecting to the land and that, like, really that grounding aspect of the business, as well as, letting that then feed the energy that goes into the business as well.
Yeah, it feels like you're kind of like walking in two worlds, literally. Like you're on the land, harvesting, having a relationship with plants, but then you do have the business side of things where it's like you have to probably make sales and orders and all these other things that you don't see behind the scenes. And how do you keep it all, going? Like, where do you find your balance? What helps you restore?
Yeah, so over this past year, I've grown a team, which has been amazing. So there's 4 Squamish women working with me on the ground here in Squamish, doing everything from product batching to order fulfillment to customer relations. And then I have 2 people working at a distance as well. So that's been amazing because pretty much this time last year, it was just me. And I realized pretty quickly that I was just not able to keep up, like you say, with all of the aspects of running and growing a business. So definitely like having a team working alongside me has been incredible. And it's also allowed me this year during harvest season to go out with a team of women. We're an all women business right now. And so to go out on the land with these Squamish, kin and family members and harvest together. And it's just brought like such a different element and such a rich element to, to that business activity. But first and foremost, it's really about, reclaiming presence on the land and that knowledge that gives us the confidence and strength to go out and reconnect with those ancestral rights and relationships on the land. And then, I think I'm part of an Indigenous accelerator program called the Fireweed Fellowship, which has been incredible in terms of just bringing the sort of support and expertise into basically into reach. And so that's really helped me to scale and continue to grow my business this past year.
And I know it's really been growing over the last year. I was introduced to your work when I did a partnership with RBC, and you're also being highlighted as one of the Indigenous businesses. And I'm curious to know, like, where did your vision start for your business, and where did your relationship with plant medicine, like, where did that all begin? Was that something that you had ever since you were a child, or is that something that you started reclaiming when you became an adult? I'm curious to know, like, where did this vision start?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I've thought a lot about it and kind of felt into it over the last few years, especially. I kind of came to this area of work in particular through coming back to university, looking for something that I wanted to study that brought together my desire to be outside, to be reconnecting to my culture and community, because I grew up away from Squamish. And I found out about this area of study, and I was so excited. And I did everything I needed to do in order to get there, which included a lot of like upgrading courses and just really diving in, like in my like with my mind, like just really focused on that cerebral, learning process and that challenge and meeting that challenge. And then I started to realize pretty quickly, once I was there, I was studying botany. I was able to take some, ethnobotany courses, but I realized pretty quickly that I was feeling really uncomfortable and really just unsettled, I guess, through the literature I was reading, through the conversations that I was having in spaces that were very white dominated. I was the only Indigenous person, especially like in the science programs, and then the only Indigenous person in my master's program, and reading literature that was often coming from ethnographers and this very extractive place. And on one hand, it's like, okay, here's an amazing historical, treasure talking about this particular plant that's so culturally important. And so that's amazing. But look at the context and framework that it's in. I feel really uncomfortable and really othered right now. So I guess during that time, I really started to delve more into the personal piece of it. And I started to remember, just when I was a child, my parents took me around to visit with a lot of different elders. And each of those memories was a place of like calm, of quiet, of being held in love and zero judgment, maybe other than like, I don't know, blowing bubbles with my gum or something while they were telling the story. But also like time spent on the land. And in particular, my great uncle and aunt from Snuneymuxw or Nanaimo, when I was a child, we would go out in my uncle's dugout canoe and we would catch fish, and I would help him hang fish in his smokehouse and then go to his garden, and we'd gather foods to then share as a family. And that for me has framed and continues to frame what is so important about reconnecting, to our identities through access to land and plant foods and medicines, is that it brings us together, as families, as community, and it nourishes us as individuals in a way that is based in Indigenous wellness and health practices. And so Sḵwálwen has kind of become a creative outlet for that work, and really bringing like kind of the visual storytelling to that process.
That's amazing. It sounds like not only is your work like your life purpose, but it's also like healing when you're on the land and you're working with others on the land as well. What would be your advice for maybe someone who is feeling the same way? Because I could imagine like it's so intertwined with Indigenous sovereignty, being on the land, honoring the cycles, and then to go learn about it in a school in a colonial context where, it's probably being exploited. What would your advice be for the younger generation who maybe wants to get involved with what you're doing, but is also feeling like this, I don't know, cognitive dissonance, I guess you could say?
Yeah, it's a great question. And one of the things that I really looked for when I was an undergrad student and then a graduate student was to see and hear Indigenous voices and see Indigenous people in the field and Indigenous voices and perspectives in the literature. So that is changing.
Mhm.
I'm that's one goal of mine is to write and to publish in this field from my perspective. But I would also give advice to anyone, especially coming in, on the science path or, in an academic setting to like one way is to read outside of your field. And I would suggest turning to Indigenous studies because there's so much power, in the literature within that field that directly connects if you're
Mm.
studying, Indigenous relationships with place or plants or other non-human life. There's so much that can be drawn on there for really creating a framework and bringing the language to whatever your lived experience is in that path. Know that your presence there is powerful and that everything that you're gaining from that experience will just give you, the foundation to apply it in life after school in a way that you want to. Because often it's hard to do that within the walls of an institution, but you
Yeah.
then have that power and you have that knowledge to mobilize in a way that you want to. And so I think that's an important thing to remember.
Yeah, you're really starting on like a strong foundation. And I know, like, as Indigenous people, we have these traditions and these protocols, but the world around us is always changing and we have to adapt kind of with our surroundings. And so I'm curious to know, like, what does your process look like now? You kind of mentioned honoring cycles and, honoring the seasons. Is there a way that you kind of decolonize your perception of even linear time? I'm curious to know like what your process looks like now, remaining faithful and true to your Indigenous roots, but also with a world that's ever changing.
Yeah. Well, especially over this past year, I've had mindfulness practices in my life before, and they've really helped me through very difficult times. And that's looked like following a meditation practice and just having even visualizations. And over this last year, I've really found that my work and my time on the land have melded with that into what feels like a land-based and a plant-focused mindfulness practice. And so that for me has really helped me through different difficult times, over this past year, or even just like challenging times, to just close my eyes and to actually envision and walk myself through a harvest.
Mm.
And what that does is it grounds me in the season, in the time of year, not so much the month, the calendar month, but really like, okay, like during the time that our nettles start coming up. That's early in the spring. It's the sunlight looks like this, the air feels like this, and here's the other plants that are coming out. And so I think that what I've started to live with is a growing connection to the seasonal round in this area that was so critical to my ancestors, and upheld so many relationships. And I find that that's just such a different place to operate than thinking, okay, like on April 14th, I need to go out and I need to see if this species is ready, or, because that fluctuates and that changes, especially now, year to year. But if I understand kind of the flow of how our plant relatives are coming back, in the spring and summer, then that really helps, I think, to frame even the ways that I'm spending my time, how I talk to my kids about it, the types of
Mm.
harvesting implements we start to kind of get ready. And so, yeah, it's a really nice way to engage with the land in a seasonal way.
Yeah, plant medicine has, it's something that I've been wanting to learn more about, but I often feel at times like I live in a city. And so even though we have the ocean and the land, I often feel like disconnected from the land because it is a very busy city. And so I guess what would be your advice be for someone that's looking to connect back to the land, but like is living in a fast paced city, or maybe there's some plants that I should be like inviting into my life? Like, I don't know. I need the basics.
Totally. Yeah, and I think about this often too when I talk about, we're fortunate in Squamish because I can kind of like, walk out the back door and there are a lot of trails and green spaces. But I think in like I have a lot of family and friends who live in urban settings, and I think that a couple of things come to mind. One is that wherever we are, we can invite these plant medicines into our lives through planting them. And if you plant a seed or you plant a starter or you transplant a culturally important plant into, a patio box or just somewhere to have it in your in close proximity to you, then that's a way in and of itself to to build that connection. And so that's one way. And then it also, gives, I think, an opportunity to really see and witness that plant through its life cycle, because that's such a part of building relationships. And sometimes it's harder even to get out onto the land and really keep an eye on that particular plant and how it changes. And then another thing that I think, this isn't so much individuals could, like if you have access to a community garden or you have friends who have a garden space, looking and doing some research on native plant nurseries in the area and just inviting some of those plants into those spaces, as well as, I think like any city development now should really be looking at indigenizing their landscaping to have those green spaces and those culturally grounded spaces for Indigenous populations in the cities. Even if you're coming from different places, it's still a common space to come to honor that relationship and just sit within the beauty of those plant medicines and foods.
Do you ever wonder what goes on behind the scenes of your favorite homegrown films and TV shows? Well, it's time to pop some popcorn, go behind the camera, and meet the people who are making it happen. I'm Mariska Fernandez, host of the Maple Popcorn Podcast. In this new series, you will discover exclusive interviews with Canadian icons and hear them talk about Canadian flicks and even break the fifth wall to share set anecdotes. This podcast is produced by The Brand is Female and powered by Telefilm Canada. Subscribe now on the podcast app of your choice and don't miss an episode. Stay in the know by visiting telefilm.ca/see-it-all.
It's funny that you say that because I have a healer and that's like the first thing she told me. She's like, you need to get plants in your space so that you can watch something grow and create a relationship with that. And I have to say, like, I'm kind of resistant because before I wasn't even a plant mom. I was a babysitter and then all the plants died, but I was like 18. So like I could barely take care of myself. So I felt bad, but I was like, okay, I was at 18, like, now that I'm grown, maybe I can develop a better relationship now that my foundation is strong. But one thing that I am mindful of is flower essences. And I have been introducing flower essences in my life for the past year. And I have to say that on a subtle energy level, it has been definitely shifting my emotional states and even like the way I view things. And so I don't know if you're familiar with flower essences, or because I know that each plant holds like a vibration for your emotions, right? Am I saying this correct?
Yeah, and that's not my area of knowledge and expertise, but I have sourced some flower essence medicines from a friend of mine, Jackie Wilson, who's an Indigenous naturopathic doctor, and on Instagram, I think it's among the wildflowers. I'd have to look at
I know who you're talking about.
Yeah, and so I did because I was working with basically, a healer and mindfulness, support person. And they also suggested working with some flower essences just around, especially like with the heart opening and just doing that in a safe, supported way. And I have really felt a resonance with inviting those medicines into my life. And although I don't prepare them and I don't understand, like I don't have the depth of knowledge like you spoke about, about the different like vibrations that plants have. But I think, we're learning more and more from both scientific, but when we've known from a cultural, viewpoint that plants hold this energy. They communicate and interact in many more ways than we're able to just see visibly. And so I think that it's really amazing to think about just how the energy from those plants can be brought into our lives in ways that are like deeply grounding or enriching, whatever it is that people are kind of searching for.
Yeah. And you already do that, I think, through a different lens of your skincare line, everything that you're currently making. For those of you who are not familiar with her work, could you explain a little bit behind what your line is and what you hope to do through your skincare line? Is it just skin, or have you branched out to other things now?
So Sḵwálwen is primarily a skincare line, but I do have some wellness products, a couple of tea blends, and a room spray, a calming room spray, as well as bath salts, which I guess kind of bridge the two. But yeah, so Sḵwálwen Botanicals is a collection of Indigenous plant-based skincare and wellness products that are grounded in a deep respect and relationship with culturally important plants. And so we have everything from facial care, so facial oils and serums and toners, facial cleansing bar, as well as the body oils and bath salts, and then the tea blends, and a collection of salves as well. And what the idea with Sḵwálwen kind of really, or I guess where it started, was really looking at inviting these culturally important plant ingredients in and doing just really gentle processes with them, like infusing them into really beautiful plant oils, and then mixing that and blending that with plant butters and steam distilled essential oils, and just really creating simple but effective skincare that really highlights and features culturally, at least one culturally important plant ingredient. And so each of the products has a Squamish name to honor where the knowledge is coming from. And it's also been really meaningful to me to connect to my Indigenous language, because I'm not a language speaker, but to learn some of the words and to really kind of connect to some of the concepts through language has been really meaningful. And so Sḵwálwen is a Squamish word that doesn't have a direct English translation. And I really like that because, it most closely translates to spiritual heart or essence of being. But I like that it doesn't translate directly, because I've heard from some of the young language speakers who are really renewing that practice and knowledge, is that when they learn the Squamish language, there's a whole different reference point for the world. There's words that they can't find in English, and there's a whole different opportunity for belonging and, identity and strength, I think, that comes from that. So the language has been a really key part as well.
Yeah, I love how you interweave that, because like you're saying, there's colonial English words that will never describe something in a native language because there isn't a context or a definition for it. I was reading this book, Braiding Sweetgrass, and she talks about the power behind language and the power behind plants. And through the power of your brand, what do you hope for in the future? What is your vision for the rest of 2021?
Yeah, so I am in the process of growing this brand. I would love to be probably the first Canadian Indigenous luxury skincare brand that is top of mind across luxury skincare spaces. I feel that there's an opportunity, and I know that I certainly will not be alone in that space for long. There's so many incredible businesses, and I think entrepreneurship is something that comes so naturally to Indigenous people. So I would love if I can, forge a part of the path into that space, and to really elevate the understanding of what it means to turn to the land for beauty, to turn to the land for grounding, and how having some self-care rituals also can, help support us within our own community care. Like, how is it that we bring ourselves to our families and communities and to the land? So I would love to, continue to grow and scale and increase both our retail and direct to consumer, businesses. We haven't done any paid advertising or anything like that yet, and we're going to start this year. So it's kind of an exciting opportunity to like get the storytelling out there. And
yeah. Yeah, I can imagine. Like I don't have my own skincare line, obviously, but working as like an influencer and working with brands and wanting to get your face out there, like I feel like at times it is very inspiring, but also very challenging because you've never seen yourself represented in these places, and some brands may not have the best history, and there's like all these other contracts, and people don't understand all this other stuff that's happening behind the scenes. And so I guess my question is like, what is one challenge you've faced as an individual, and what has been one of your big like learning what would you say, learning not learning obstacle, but like what
like opportunities?
yeah
Pain point and growth point. That's a great question. And I think early on in this, and it kind of mirrors my academic experience in some ways too, is that I was coming to like both my study of culturally important plants and then like my exploration of starting this business from really heart-driven places, places that were deeply connected and interwoven with my own personal path, my story, my family, my ancestors. And so I think coming from that place at the same time as really learning, and developing my own critical awareness and language around the direct impacts of, colonial history and ongoing oppression on, say, land access or plant knowledge, on what beauty means, more like broadly as a society, and really looking to shift those narratives. So that in and of itself has been really necessary and continues to be, and really enriching, but it's also really hard at times to be, kind of looking at often what's reflected back, from society is still like, stories of like deficit or solely of trauma, and not so much the celebration of resilience and strength and beauty. And so I think just keeping going along that path and just really demonstrating without explaining or justifying, just demonstrating this is what indigeneity and beauty looks like. This is what our people on the land look like. Like, take it in. This is something that is our right, and just doing that and letting that infuse into the world, as well as some like specific messaging and dialogue and conversation. But I think that's a big part that's been both challenging, but also really, I guess, enriching.
Yeah, like embodying the wisdom almost, and embodying the truth. And you've kind of already mentioned like stuff that makes you feel in your power and in your truth. But what are practices that, when you are feeling overwhelmed or lethargic, that bring you back to your authority and your power as an Indigenous woman?
So definitely time spent on the land, even if it's just going outside and breathing some fresh air, feeling the wind on my face, that resets me. Physical activity, whether that's related to just, going for a trail walk or like that's a real place of renewal for me. And also like, getting a good kickboxing class in to really process like some of the, the other emotions that come up. And then the ritual, like, I found this year, I really turned to baths and to, lighting a candle, utilizing one of the, I have bath salt blends on hand because we have them as part of the business. So, like bringing one of those bath salts in, having a book that is really grounding me. Like I've been reading Leanne Simpson's latest book. I don't know how to pronounce the name properly, but it's just creating those spaces where it's okay to slow down. It's okay to renew and have that ceremony. That's been really And
Mm-hmm.
yeah, really important.
You're reminding me of myself. I spend a lot of time in baths, and like I don't know if it's because I'm a water sign, but like I need to like just have a bath bomb, bath salts, light a candle. So we do the same exact things. What is one of your favorite products in your line?
Well, I use the Wild Rose facial oil and toner in combination every morning. So I spritz, after I cleanse my face, I spritz the toner and then I put the facial oil on right away. And it just like emulsifies and absorbs really beautifully. And I just find that every day is such a nice way to start my day.
Yeah. Yeah, I believe you gifted me that rose serum. Is it the facial oil? Yeah, that's
Oh, yeah. So I have
yeah, that one I went by. I probably used way too much than what I'm supposed to because like it just felt so good on my skin and it kept it hydrated. I definitely need to purchase a new bottle. When we are on this podcast, it's all about Indigenous women's voices and reclaiming our power. And there's this word called, well, matriarchy, being a matriarch. And I'm curious to know, how do you define a matriarch in your own words? And are there matriarchs you are currently inspired by?
So a matriarch to me just brings up, vision of a powerful person, a leader that leads with like deep love, but also strength. And when I think about the matriarchs that have been important in my life and the women that I turn to, now as well, it's the women who carry with them the lived experience and wisdom and are able to really demonstrate that and then share that with generations that to come. And I've found, especially in my community-based work with my community and other Indigenous communities, I've just had the honor to work with matriarchs in those different communities. And I find that I just like when you're in the presence of one of these women, because you just know that you stop, you slow down and you listen. And I think that that's such a gift, and it's not something that you're being told or it's just like, okay, this is where I kind of I stand beside you and I just listen. And so that's something that I really value. And then I also think about my grandmothers who are not, no longer here, and my great Auntie Eva, who I mentioned, and just how they are with me still and how I still turn to them, so often and recognize their strength and beauty and leadership. And that's something that's so close to my heart.
It's kind of like a transmission of like our grandmothers, the matriarchs that were before us, and the work that we're doing now, spilling that medicine out into the future. And so it's weaving like past, present, and future. And when we think of Indigenous futurism, what does Indigenous futurism look like to you?
So the first thing that comes to mind is just creating something new, creating a new framework, a new blueprint, a new, definition for what it means to bring indigeneity into our lives on all levels. And I think part of that, is working within existing systems, certainly, I think, but having more Indigenous representation, like across all aspects of society at the same time, is really just creating the vision and the action and the path forward in our own way, as diverse Indigenous people, but certainly, I think there's shared commonalities in terms of where some of those pillars of strength and identity are, for our diverse communities. So I think also for me, a big part of that is going, like, turning back to the land, and in whatever way that means, for you as an individual, but that's a big piece of it for myself. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's so important to have that balance of, this is the vision I have, but at the end of the day, I can still go back to the land and I can still feel at home and nourished there. Where can people support and follow your work and everything that you're up to?
Yeah, so Sḵwálwen.com is the website, and you can go there to read more about the brand. We have an about video that really features some of my loved ones. My sister is in the video and bringing the Squamish language into it. And then just that's where we have our shop. And also you can sign up for our newsletter where we share lots of information there. And Instagram is Sḵwálwen Botanicals as well. And we have a growing community there, and really, just love engaging with the community in that space. And on the website as well, there's a list of retailers where they carry our products. And we've got a lot of really amazing partnerships in that way across Canada. So that's another place to check it out.
Sweet. Are you making any new products this year?
Yes, we have some new products in the works. And I'm hoping we're bringing back fan favorite product, the sweetgrass and sage cream, finally will be ready for the fall. So keep an eye out for that.
I didn't ask you about this though. How long does it take to test something? Because I would imagine you have to make sure you make the right formula and everything. So how long is that process in itself?
Well, it's different. With in-house production, it's a bit different because you have all the ingredients there. You're making the formula. You can, you can send it out for sort of lab testing, but you can also just test it within your kind of community of people in terms of getting the formulation right. And then with outsourcing, which is something that I'm just learning about, it takes quite a long time because then you're inviting a whole other system, and logistics and timelines into the process. So I will be able to report back on that in the coming months for sure.
Well, thank you so much for sharing your energy, and I look forward to the updates, and I look forward to getting your new products and seeing them in stores. I feel like that's what we need. We need more Indigenous luxury skincare products in stores where people can literally just grab it. But if you want to, you can visit her website. Also follow her on Instagram. I'll post the links below this. Thank you so much for sharing your wisdom, your knowledge, and your energy. Hi. Hope you enjoyed today's episode, and I would love your feedback. Follow me on Instagram at Shayla0H, at Matriarch.Movement. And don't forget to subscribe on the pod platform of your choice and review and rate where possible. I'll be back in a week. Hi. Thank you so much for tuning in.